love being on this platform because I get to meet people who are living their lives, but also having an impact in a way that I wouldn't know about if I wasn't on these airwaves. This woman is a philanthropist, so she's taken her vast wealth that she has built and acquired and helping other people. She's the founder of L2E Industries, multi-million dollar premier courier service. But her story to me is one that I think we all should hear because it tells you what the indomitable spirit of one person can bear. So let me welcome to the show, survivor Sophia Strother. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show. Hi.
Thank you.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly, Strother?
No.
No, was it Struthers? Strother Lewis?
It's Strother Lewis.
Strother. Oh, this was the TH is th.
Yeah.
Strother Lewis. Okay,
Mhm.
Sophia Strother Lewis is not a. It's a long. Oh, thank you, thank you. I was telling you we initially booked you to talk about the your great organization, but as I'm reading your story, I'm like, this woman has been through some things. We were just talking about the founding fathers of this country and how much of the way in which we saw our last president behave was kind of foundational. This is how people, and will you share a little bit about what you're going through when you said right now you're picking a jury for your own personal trial that people are going to be held accountable for, hopefully?
Yes. So unfortunately, January 1 of 2021, I was sexually assaulted by someone who didn't have a proper visa. And it has taken this time for finally, after 4 set-offs, for me to actually go to trial. And, one of the things I just more recently really became more vocal because it's almost concluded. So I don't go into details, but it's almost concluded. But I was at it's called a law enforcement sexual assault training that's put on by an organization called TASA, which stands for Texas Against Sexual Assault Association. And I really wanted to take my rage of the process and educate because I've been more traumatized through the law enforcement, prosecutorial, and judicial process than the incident. And I was talking to someone earlier today, and I said, I have been made to feel completely worthless in the process by my voice not even being adhered to within the process of this, and that he actually had more rights than I did for someone that's not even a US citizen. That's a whole nother conversation, but he's had more rights as my perpetrator than I have been the victim. And at no process has there been to truly protect me as the victim. And even more so when you look at the hue of my complexion, that has been so evident within the systems that are already in place. And one of the things that I told someone, and it was just in a moment of vulnerability that I said, oh, I just wish I never said anything. And it just, again, I do a whole nother level of advocacy with human trafficking because I am also a survivor of human trafficking. And I talk about, I know what it's like. I know what it's like. And I normally advocate for people to get loud, get out. That's my hashtag. Get loud, tell somebody, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking. And then I had to be faced with actually being able to hold somebody accountable for what they did against me. And I'm like, oh, I get it. Now I see why, over 80% of us don't say anything because we do not feel seen and heard through the process. And that honestly, it doesn't matter what color you are, but when you add the layer of us being people of color, it makes it even worse. And so today, actually, they're going to be picking the jury in my case. I'm not able to be present. That's why I'm able to afford myself to you. And then tomorrow, my witnesses, and then I will actually be testifying on my behalf on Wednesday and finally able to have my voice in court, but still in the back of my mind, having this, you're supposed to be in front of a jury of your peers, but I'm actually going in front of a county that's primarily white. And is it truly of my peers? And then also in the back of your mind as a Black person, do you have it to where will they see me as a woman or will they see me as a Black woman that's over sexualized, or will she ask for it? Or all of those stereotypes that we know exist are plaguing in the back of your mind to make sure that they can see what happened to a woman and not what happened to a Black woman.
As Sophia Strother Lewis is here, as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about, because I was talking about the founding fathers. Um, the founding of this country, until a very short period of time ago, black people didn't have autonomy over their bodies. You
Mhm.
could not rape an enslaved person. You could not
Right,
sexually assault an enslaved person. That was your property. You could do whatever you wanted with that body, right?
right,
Women couldn't be raped until very recently. A woman could not claim rape against her husband,
right,
right? And you couple that with being black, right? You think I
right,
think about Daniel Pantaleo, I think his name was a police officer that had raped dozens of women, but because they were mostly black,
right,
mostly impoverished, mostly some sex workers, no one said anything until he
mhm,
raped a grandmother who he assumed certain, and she spoke, and because of that, he's serving like 200 years.
right,
But if you think about it, this goes on a lot, and I feel because society has been conditioned to see, if it's not Natalie Holloway, how many missing black women and boys and trans, I mean, there's like missing people every day and no one talks about it. And I'm glad you came in today, because I was thinking about how I could use this platform to magnify those stories. And then I'm like, let's talk about trafficking. Like, it is a huge industry. It's an industry. We talk about porn, which I think they're one and two, right? But we don't talk about the trafficking of these bodies as people that come from trafficked bodies.
right.
Why aren't we talking about it?
Well, I think, and just to make clarity in the distinction between pornography and human trafficking, there are elements of pornography where there might be women that are put in that industry against their will, but there are a lot of women that voluntarily want to um, do sex work. I mean, they voluntarily want to go into that industry because it can be very financially beneficial, to where they feel as though that is the more lucrative option because they may not have other options in wherever they're at, or they may not feel they can make the amounts of money that they can. Thus in lies the problem of the trafficking component, where you have myself, I was a victim of familiar trafficking as a juvenile. I did not experience it as an adult, nor did I experience prostitution as an adult. However, the majority of those, according to an FBI study that was placed out about 4 years ago, indicated that over 50% of juveniles that are victims of trafficking are girls of color, and women that are over the age of 17, so 18 and over, about 40% of those that are exposed are Black women. However, whenever you see the majority of stories that come out, or billboards or things of that nature, they will be women of other ethnicities, primarily because those that can afford to actually put money behind the action don't look like us. They are white. And typically, white people will be more empathetic to a little white girl that they see as opposed to a Black girl. Then we also have it to where you don't have a lot of women like myself who are survivors of human trafficking that have come out publicly to show that you can yet thrive again. So it's a twofold issue as to, again, where is the money? The money is not in the Black community in regards to this issue. And there's the stereotype that, again, we're over sexualized, we ask for it, this is what we do and it's expected. And then we have that the majority of pimps that are actually prosecuted and convicted are Black men, not white men, but they're not the majority that are actually committing the crime. They just happen to be the ones that are going to be convicted of the crime. So now you have the threat that here are Black men pimping out girls. So that's where you have this whole thing that we scared of Black men, that's just kind of something that's continued in history. And then you have it to where the poor little white girl that may be trafficked by a Black man that get exposed. Now we have to rally around that. And we're going to go to the white donor because they typically, and this is no slight to us, are more proactive in putting their money behind that as opposed to people of color. And that is something where I feel like it's not about we're going to blame the white person, because we have to also see the value in protecting and also investing in these types of things that affect our children and our women of color.
866-801-8255. You were 13, 9 when you were first abused, and then 13 when you were sexually trafficked. What were the circumstances behind you and what does define that? What happened? What happened? How
So I actually was first introduced to sexual violence at the age of 9. My father actually started to sexually abuse me at 9 years old while my mom was at work at night and introduced me to pornography. Pornography tends to be a gateway or other vulnerabilities. We were not poor, so I always want to dismiss that it's always the poor, fragile homes. Human trafficking doesn't have a social economic lens per se. There are rich, white, and Black people that are exposed, and there are those that are poor. Poor just technically doesn't have the voice like someone that might be more affluent when their parents or family comes out and finds out about it. But we were actually a very typical middle class. My father was an engineer, worked for it was called Bay State Gas Company in Springfield, Massachusetts. And my mother was an LVN, and she worked alongside mentally ill, elderly individuals. So we were very well-to-do in that regards. Both were making $60,000 to $70,000 back in the 80s. That's not too bad. And so my father, though, while my mom was at work, started to sexually abuse me from 9 to 11 years old, which kind of laid the foundation for me to not to have a voice. I was an only child. We did not go to church, so there was no quote unquote moral compass. And then when I did start to go to church, most of the men at the church actually abused me. But that's a whole nother story for another day. But he kind of led the groundwork for me not to have a voice. He told me that this is what I'm supposed to do. If men say to do it, you do it. Whatever you see in this pornography film, I want you to do it with me. And again, you can't tell your mom, she's going to be jealous. She won't understand. So who am I to question what my father said? Because I love my dad. I was literally a daddy's girl, and everything I did was with my dad because my mom slept during the day. Well, unfortunately, my father died in a tragic accident in 1993. He had left my mother, and he wanted to come off of drugs. Both of them succumbed to crack cocaine in the late 80s. And he decided he actually wanted to give his life to Christ and left my mother. And as a result of that, he had a withdrawal seizure behind the wheel and went into 12,000 gallons of gasoline that had just been filled at Mobil gas station on Columbus Avenue, and he burnt to death. Immediately following that tragic death, and I always exhale on that because that wasn't the worst of my life. The worst of my life was his death, because my mom, in a sense of just utter despair, decided that she would look at her daughter as the means for her livelihood. At that point, she left Springfield, Massachusetts, where we're from, and moved to Marlin, Texas, which is a very rural area, and decided to allow me to be currency. At that time, my identity and my name changed literally from Sophia to currency. And she started to groom me to receive funds to pay the bills and to give it to her so that she could secure her
Sophia,
development.
what was that conversation? Was there a conversation?
No. How my mom
So
did it.
how does she approach her then 13-year-old and say, this is what we're going to do? Or is you're in a room with a man and this, like how does it even happen?
So what
Are
she
you
would
in school?
do?
Are there teachers?
So I am in school. I am bred, and like most ethnic cultures, what happens in our house stays in our house. I've also, the reason I gave the preface of my father is I am to do what I'm told to do. I am at the discretion of men. So I have a mindset that this is who I am and this is what I do, and I don't tell anybody anything. But my mom would come to me and she would show me that the lights are about to get turned off. And she would say to me at that point, and I did have one younger brother at that time. She had another child by my father at this point. And again, he's died. And so she's crying and she's saying, I'm actually named after my mom. So she would say, little Soph, the lights are about to get turned off. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need you to go ask so-and-so for $20. I need you to get so-and-so to give some money so we can get some food. And so if you're in the mindset, I'm 13 years old and I go to these individuals, and these are older men. These are men that are at least 25 to 45 years old. And then eventually, unfortunately, with 60-year-old men. And there's only so many times they're going to give you money without there being an exchange. And then I'm given the ultimatum, don't come home unless you have this money. Because then if you don't come home with this money, then we're going to be homeless and it's your fault. So what she's doing is what most predators do. They set it up to where now you have to have sex for survival, and it's not trafficking. I did not relate to being trafficked until I was 36 years old because I didn't understand that that's what was happening, that my mom was my pimp. I had this stereotype that the pimp was like a Bishop Don Juan. He on the block, you got the hose, go get my money, come back with the fishnets. That wasn't me. What I was I have to go, and if I'm gonna get $100, I got to get on my back. If I want $40, I'm gonna get on my knees. So it became to where she gave me the ultimatum: don't come home unless you get it. The only way I'm getting it is through trafficking, which is sex. That's the only way I'm gonna get this money, because these men aren't gonna continue to just give me money for nothing. Or I would have men meet. I'm on my way back from school, and I'll never forget this one particular occasion where this guy, he met me where it's a partial alley like area, and he's like, yo, your mom told me to hit you up to settle her debt. And I was like, what? To settle her debt? Yeah, so I need you to get on your knees so I can excuse her $200 debt. And so it just becomes a mindset. At the time, I grew up an only child. I did not grow up in church per se. When I did go to church, almost all the men around me were trying to sexually harass me or molest me in church. And then I have a father who is dead, but bred me that this is who I am. There aren't billboards. They're not talking about trafficking. They're not talking about these things in school. There is no real outlet in the 90s to even understand what trafficking is. Nobody, not even a television station, was talking about trafficking. And that time, you're a prostitute. If you're a prostitute, you're shunned on. And then from the life of me, now that I'm older, how can somebody that's not even legal enough to leave school be a prostitute? So you're telling me I can make a decision on my body sexually, but I can't make a decision when it comes to education or paying a bill or getting my own place. So that was the mindset. They bred me from a very young age to, like, this is what I have to do if we're going to eat, or if we're going to have a roof over my head. And now I become the primary breadwinner from my house, of my mom, my younger brother. And in that time, she had another child. So now I have two younger brothers that I am meant to believe I have to go out and do these things. And basically, I call myself a hustler. I got to go out there and hustle and make this money. Well, that's the only way I was able to get it in this rural town at the time, was through my body as currency.
How did that, and so at 15 you end up pregnant?
I do. One of her drug dealers actually, no was not an option for him, and I became pregnant by one of her drug dealers.
What happened to the child?
I tried to abort, but it did not. God said no. And I tried to abort actually at 6 months. And when I went, and I'll never forget it, that's how I know it was an intervention of God. When I went, they said I was 2 weeks too far. By the time I got home, they said, no, they miscalculated. You could have had it. And by having my son, it gave me a whole different premise that I had to get out. Like it wasn't an option, because it wasn't just about me anymore. And I reached out to my grandmother, who is now deceased, who became to me like my savior. And I told her, if I don't leave, I'll be dead or a prostitute. Those were my two options at that time for my livelihood. In October 21st of 1995, I was 15 years old with a 3-month-old. She sent a one-way ticket for me to leave my mother, and I hadn't looked back. That doesn't mean that my healing was complete, because that actually started my layers of relationships of domestic violence and sexual assault, because I still don't have a voice nor an identity. And I feel everything in my life is a transaction, or to be at the whim and pleasure of men. So that then started another 15-year journey of additional abuses, because the foundation of my life from 9 has been about sexual violence and degradation.
Sophia Strother Lewis is here. And the number is 866-801-8255. You can go to Sophia Strother, STROTHER.com, and see what she's doing. L2E Industries. So with all of this, you end up going to school, graduating, getting a master's, and now starting this multi-million-dollar organization around helping people. Walk us through that. How did you heal yourself enough to be able to give to others?
You know, I had just got to a point in my life, and I get emotional thinking about it. By the time I reached 36, I had just come out of another dysfunctional and oppressive relationship. My oldest son at the time was everything that I abhorred in men. The one that I didn't want to have, but that I felt saved my life when I did, became everything that I hated in men. And then my mother at the time was still in and out of, well, she wasn't out of drugs ever, but she was still in drugs and still manipulative. And I remember locking myself away in my room while my two other children that I had, a daughter and a son, I believe my daughter might have been 7 or 8 at the time. My son must have been about 10, 11 years old, somewhere in there. And I remember I looked at a bottle of pills and I said, I'm good. Like, if everything in my life and every man in my life is going to abuse and neglect me, I'm good. I'm done. I'm exhausted. I had never been to any sufficient therapy up until that point to really deal with my past or to deal with this on and off again relationship that with my mom that had been so very stringent. Because really at the heart of things, I just wanted a mom for so long. I just wanted a mom, but she really didn't have the capacity to be a mom. And I still didn't understand or realize that. So when I finally went to therapy, because I had gotten to such of that low point, Cheryl Alexander, who is out of Round Rock, Texas, and I talk about her every single time. The first 5 minutes, I was in there crying and talking about my son and this and that and life. And she just stopped me and she was like, are you done? And she said it just like that. That's why I think representation is so vitally important when it comes to therapy, because everybody can't talk to you a certain type of way, but because there's that commonality of culture, I was able to stop for a minute and be like, who, you talking to me? And she was like, yeah, Sophia, when is enough going to be enough? And that phrase alone really struck a chord, because she said to me, you have to accept accountability at some point in your life, because we can't keep riding the heels of mom and dad and what happened. You have to start looking at how you think, how you see the world. Everybody doesn't think like you. That's when she introduced me to the Enneagram, to really start diving into why I make the decisions that I make. And understanding that so many of the broken relationships that I had got into, broken men that I was trying to fix, was because I truly, in essence, wanted to be fixed. And until I had that realization for myself, I would have never invested 4 years later into an idea that can then have me over a multi-million-dollar company. And literally, and I stress this again, just because you may be successful on the exterior does not mean that you are healed and whole on the interior. And I really had to realize that Sophia had to take accountability for where she was now. And then that allowed me to be open to the fact that when I saw an article, it was either in Forbes or Enterprise, about Amazon and them doing this delivery service partner. They wanted like people that didn't have any experience whatsoever for a $10,000 investment, which is really more than that. But they tell you for a $10,000 investment, you too can have a business where you can make a profit of $74,000 to $2.5 million. At that time, I was working for the Department of Family Protective Services, and I hadn't gotten a raise in over 4 years. And I actually ended up resigning from that entity in 2021 and literally never received a raise that entire time, and left that place and was able to, now I'm over almost 100 people. Our revenue is 3.3 million and growing, and over other conglomerates within that. But I had to take a chance on me. I had to realize that at some point I couldn't just stay comfortable. And I think what happens is we get, well, how am I going to pay my bills? And how the hows keep coming, and you end up stuck for another 10 years. And I had to realize that if I truly had the faith that I had, it's not about me to answer the how, because again, that's my place and that's my faith. It's for me to believe in myself enough to know I'm worth the risk and the investment. And that's what led to me then getting into this partnership with Amazon, but then also doing other ventures outside of that, like my nonprofit, which I did that long before that, but taking those skill sets that I had to be able to do my nonprofit and really implementing that in the core values of what I have in my company right now.